Welcome to the respiratory system. Just like with the endocrine system, muscular system, nervous system, cardiovascular system, we're going to talk first about functions. And so we've got these two topics and a total of 3 outcomes. So this will be a relatively short video. So the lungs do a lot of different things, but we're going to focus on 3 primary functions. The first and probably most important is gas exchange. The pulmonary capillaries, and that's part of your bloodstream, is where oxygen enters the bloodstream and carbon dioxide leaves the bloodstream. So these things are going in between the pulmonary capillaries and the alveoli. Then we've got acid-base balance, and we're actually going to spend 2 full days talking about acid-base balance later on in the semester. This is because carbon dioxide is a weak acid. We want to maintain pH, and so we can do that by altering our breathing. We can breathe more acid out, breathe more carbon dioxide out, or we can breathe less, which allows us to hold on to acid. And then finally, we've got heat loss. We're not really going to talk a lot about this in class, but it is important. Okay, every time you breathe out, you're losing heat. If you don't believe me, just breathe on your hand and feel the heat. There are other things that your lungs do, that your respiratory system does, including vocalization, defense against pathogens. It humidifies the air, something called the respiratory pump, plasma proteins, and a biological filter. Okay, we'll actually talk about or have talked about the respiratory pump. We've talked a little bit, or we'll talk about plasma proteins, and we'll talk about how these plasma proteins are activated specifically with the urinary pathway. But in order to understand the respiratory system, we need to understand what's going on with basic processes. So you've got ventilation. Whenever you hear ventilation, just think air is moving. Okay, now this can be due to physiological processes. This can be due to mechanical processes, right? If you watch Grey's Anatomy, they talk about putting people on a ventilator. Okay, this is not physiological ventilation because the person's not doing it. It's the machine, so that would be mechanical ventilation. And so we will talk about things in terms of pulmonary. Okay, pulmonary is lungs. So when we talk about pulmonary gas exchange, we're talking about gas exchange at the lung. This process occurs via diffusion. Oxygen diffuses into the bloodstream, carbon dioxide diffuses out of the bloodstream. Then you've got tissue gas exchange. Okay, now while this is not specifically in the lungs, because of the pulmonary gas exchange, tissue gas exchange can occur. And so again, this occurs via diffusion, but in this case, oxygen is leaving the bloodstream and carbon dioxide is entering the bloodstream. So a couple more terms. You've got pulmonary ventilation. So like I mentioned a moment ago, mechanical ventilation is something mechanical that's causing air to move in and out. Pulmonary ventilation, we're talking about air moving in and out of your lungs. Okay, and so when we talk about pulmonary ventilation, we're talking specifically about the physiological process. This allows gas exchange to occur. Inspiration, that's getting air in. This occurs because your diaphragm contracts and moves down. This is an active process, meaning if there is no muscle contraction, if your diaphragm does not contract, you are unable to inhale. Then we've got expiration. This is getting air out of your lungs. Okay, the diaphragm relaxes and moves upward. Okay, it can be a passive process. It can also be an active process. As you're sitting here watching this video, you're not having any muscle contraction occur to cause expiration, so it would be passive. But for example, if you're blowing out candles, that's an active process because you're using muscles to help force air out of your lungs. So at the end of this introductory video, can you identify the 3 primary functions of the respiratory system? And can you list and explain what's going on with different pulmonary processes?